Proxmox 9.2 shipped this year with a dynamic load balancer, a WireGuard and BGP mesh for the SDN fabric, and a command to arm and disarm high availability cluster wide for maintenance. All three are genuinely good engineering. All three need more than one node to do anything at all. If you're running Proxmox on a single box, which is most of you watching this, none of that is for you, and almost nobody making these videos says so out loud. I will. Here's what actually matters when you install this thing on one machine, plus the one thing in 9.2 that's genuinely worth your time, even on a single node, and it isn't any of the headline features. Quick context if you're new here. Last video I put an LXC container and a full VM head-to-head, same service, 61 MB of RAM against 759 for Pi-hole. That ran on a different mini PC, a 10th gen Core i3 laptop chip. That one's staying in production. I'm not touching it. None of you asked how a node like that actually gets set up before anything runs on it. I don't care, we're doing it anyway. This is that answer on a second node, built from scratch, storage, network, security, before a single VM touches it. Call this Homelab from scratch, part 1. And I still owe you part 2, native OCI image support in PVE 9.1, which I promised properly last time and haven't delivered. That's next after this. Quick word on the hardware, because the decisions later only make sense against it. This is a mini PC, not a rack server, 1 CPU, 16 gigs of non-ECC RAM, 1 SSD slot, 1 NIC. No redundant power, no hardware RAID card, no room to be clever. That's not a limitation I'm working around for the video. That's most Homelabs. If your box looks nothing like this, the reasoning still applies. Just swap in your own numbers where I give mine. I'm not walking you through the installer screen by screen. That video has been made 40 times and it doesn't need a 41st. Flash the ISO, boot it, and there are exactly 2 screens where you make a real decision. 1. Which disk gets wiped? Triple check this. There's no undo. 2. Hostname and static IP, because DHCP reservations are a workaround for a problem you can just not have. Everything else in this wizard is next, next, confirm. 15 minutes later, you've got a login prompt. That's it. That's the part everyone else's whole video is. First login, and here's 9.2's actual feature list on screen. Dynamic load balancer moves VMs between nodes automatically to even out resource use. You have one node, there's nothing to balance. WireGuard and BGP as SDN fabric options for stretching a network across multiple sites or clusters. You have one site. High availability arm and disarm lets you pause high availability failover cluster-wide during maintenance. You don't have high availability because high availability needs at least 3 nodes to make sense. Ceph Tentacle is the new default Ceph release. Ceph is a clustered storage system you'd have to set up on top of a cluster. Running it on one box is like buying a shipping container to move a couch. Every one of these is a real improvement, and every one of them is invisible on the box you're looking at right now. That's not a knock on Proxmox. It's a cluster hypervisor that also happens to run great on one node. It just means the what's new section of the release notes isn't your checklist, this is. First real decision. What does the root file system sit on? Proxmox gives you ZFS or LVM-thin at install time, and most guides tell you to just use ZFS without saying why or when not to. The EFS is copy on write. It checksums every block and can self-heal from silent corruption. It does real snapshots, and if you ever add a second drive, it can mirror across them for actual redundancy. The cost is RAM. ZFS wants cache to be fast, and the common rule of thumb is roughly a gig of RAM per terabyte of pool on top of what Proxmox and your guests need. On a 16 gig box with 1 SSD, you're not getting redundancy either way. One drive is one drive. But you still get checksumming and snapshots for the RAM cost, which on this hardware is affordable. LVM-thin skips all of that. No checksums, no self-healing, thin provisioned snapshots that are more limited, but almost no RAM overhead and less write amplification on a single consumer SSD with no power loss protection. My call for this box, ZFS on a single SSD, because the snapshot before you touch anything workflow is worth more to me day to day than the RAM it costs on a 16 gig machine. If your box is genuinely RAM constrained, say 8 gigs, and you're also running memory hungry VMs, LVM-thin is the honest answer, not ZFS, with your Arc cache fighting your guests for memory. There isn't a universally correct answer here. There's a correct answer for your RAM and your disk count. Second decision, network. One NIC, one cable to the switch doesn't mean one flat network. Proxmox's default bridge, VMBridge0, just passes everything through untagged. Instead, mark that bridge VLAN-aware. One checkbox in the bridge's settings, and now every VM and container's virtual network interface can carry its own VLAN tag independently over the same physical port. I run management and the Proxmox web UI itself on one VLAN, general VMs on a second, and anything I don't fully trust on a third that can't talk to the first two. That third VLAN is for things like a random container running someone else's code, or an IoT bridge. That segmentation used to require either multiple NICs or multiple physical switches. A VLAN-aware bridge plus a managed switch with trunk ports gets you the same isolation on hardware that has exactly one Ethernet jack. This does mean your switch has to support VLANs and trunking. If yours doesn't, this is the one upgrade in this whole video actually worth spending money on before anything else. Now, the part the title promised, hardening, done as part of building the box, not as a checklist you run after it's already exposed to something. 3 things, in this order, before I create a single VM or container. 1. SSH. Generate a key pair on your actual workstation, copy the public key onto this box. Before you touch the SSH config, open the second terminal and confirm you can log in with that key alone. Don't close your first, already working session until you've proven the new one works. Then edit the SSH config and turn off root password login entirely, permit root login, prohibit -password, and turn off password authentication for everyone, password authentication no. Restart the SSH service. From this point on, the only way in over SSH is a key you hold, not a password someone can guess or brute force. The web UI on port 8006 still takes your account password. Hardening, that is a separate job, use a strong password, or better, enable 2-factor on that login realm. Do this before the box has anything worth stealing, not after. 2. Containers. When you create an LXC container through the wizard, Proxmox defaults it to unprivileged, unless you explicitly uncheck that box. Unprivileged means the container's root user maps to an unprivileged user on the actual host. If something inside that container breaks out, it doesn't wake up as root on your Proxmox node. Leave that default alone. The only reason to run a privileged container is a specific compatibility need you've already hit, not a default you reach for because a forum post told you to. 3. And this is the one almost every post-install video skips because it isn't visually interesting. Configure a backup target before the first VM exists. In the data center storage menu, point at a Proxmox backup server if you're running one, or at minimum, a directory or NFS share that isn't on the same disk as your VMs. Then set up a backup job on a schedule. The reason this goes before the first VM, not after, the moment you spin up a VM without a backup destination already wired in, there's a window where that VM exists with 0 recovery path. That window could be an afternoon. It could be 3 months, if you forget. Configuring the target first means that window never opens. It costs you 10 minutes now instead of your data later. Here's the payoff from the top of the video. Buried in 9.2's changelog, not the headline list, is an improvement to you. EFI, Secure Boot Certificate Enrollment. Microsoft's older 2011 era Secure Boot certificates start expiring this year, which means Windows guests booting with Secure Boot enabled will eventually need the newer 2023 certificate chain in their EFI disk, or updates can break their boot process. Proxmox 9.2 adds those 2020 certificates and puts the enrollment step in the web, UI, and the API, not just a CLI command you had to know existed. If you're running any Windows VM with you, EFI firmware, this is a 2-minute job. Shut the VM down, open its EFI disk in the Hardware tab, and enroll the updated certificates. That firmware is required for Windows 11, and it defaults Secure Boot on the moment you add the EFI disk. That's it. Unlike everything else in the 9.2 release notes, this one applies exactly the same whether you have 1 node or 50. That's the node, wiped, reinstalled on 9.2, storage reasoned out instead of defaulted, network segmented on 1 NIC, hardened before anything touched it, and backed up before it had anything worth losing. This is the exact environment I'm about to use for the video I owe you, native OCI image support in PVE 9.1.1, properly covered this time, not a footnote. Subscribe if you want that when it's out. See you in the next one.